scientist. So hopefully you were able to watch the first part of this lesson for yesterday. But today we're actually going to talk about the rest of this. So there's a couple more, I think there's two more types of asexual reproduction we need to go over, vegetative reproduction as well as cloning. And then we're also going to talk about some advantages and disadvantages today. And this should wrap up our lessons then for asexual reproduction. And then the next 2 days, I think we're going to talk about just comparing and contrasting sexual and asexual reproduction. And then we're going to just have a review day, 2 review days, and then we're going to do that post-test and maybe another quick assessment as well from Mrs. Thumma. We'll see how that goes. So let's get started for today. So we left off, remember, talking about all the other ones. We talked about binary fission, we talked about mitosis, we talked about regeneration, and now we're going to really talk about 2 different types that are very different. So one of them is vegetative reproduction. So this one we kind of talked a little bit on Friday when we discussed strawberry plants, and this is the asexual way that strawberry plants are able to reproduce. Remember, strawberries are able to reproduce sexually because they have a flower, as well as asexually through the process of vegetative reproduction. And vegetative reproduction is when an offspring grows from a part of the parent plant. The way to remember this in terms of just the difference between budding and vegetative reproduction is only used by plants. Budding is used with organisms. That's really the big difference, and because they both kind of are growing from a part of it, but it's not the same thing. So remember, vegetative kind of sounds like vegetation, which means plants. So vegetative reproduction is used by plants. And the strawberry plant that we talked about, remember how I showed you the picture, and there's actually the picture on the next slide. We'll talk about that. They're going to send out those horizontal stems. They're called runners or also stolons. And those stolons take root. They can grow a new plant from those roots. Even if they become separated from the parent plants, you can actually cut it off and plant it once the roots are grown. And each one of those is going to grow a new plant, and those plants are going to be identical to the parent. So my other examples of vegetative reproduction, remember we talked about the potato. Remember the potato, if you leave it in a dark, cool area for a while and it sits there a little too long, it kind of looks like it's going bad, kind of gets a little mushy, but you start to see those stems growing off of it. Those are a way that when the potato that was an offspring of the regular potato is planted in the ground, can grow a whole new potato plant. And remember, it's offspring that's going from a part of the parent plant. Another one is spider plants. So spider plant is a type of house plant, and they're another example of one that can actually reproduce both sexually and asexually. So they can produce a little itty bitty flower. It's not very noticeable, but it is a flower nonetheless. But they also produce these runners where there's the big parent plant, and then there's like these little runners that grow and they hang at the bottom and they look like little spiders, and that's why it's kind of called a spider plant. They look like little spiders hanging off of a web, but each of those is an individual baby plant that you could snip off and plant and grow a whole new organism with. And that plant, remember, is going to be genetically identical to the parent. The way you know it's also identical is vegetative reproduction is a type of asexual reproduction, so it automatically means offspring must be identical. So again, this is just going to be our strawberry plant. You have the plant here again, and it's going to have its runners, and its runner then grows some roots. Remember, I told you they're kind of abrasive to the touch at first. It grips to the ground. The roots are going to start to grow, and that plant grows upwards. And then a whole new plant with strawberries is going to grow. And if you would by chance say, cut this runner right here, after these roots are grown, if you would cut this, the plant would survive even though it's no longer attached to the parent plant. So it becomes a whole new organism, but genetically identical to the parent. All right. Last one we're going to talk about in terms of forms of asexual reproduction is cloning. And cloning is a type of asexual reproduction, but it does not occur naturally in the wild. It must be performed by scientists in a laboratory. And what happens is you have to take cells from organisms from past and plant them kind of in new and currently living organisms, and through reproduction they are going to be genetically identical because the material from the cell is identical. So some advantages of cloning is that it can be used to save some species that are endangered from, extinction, which would always be great. But some disadvantages is the ethics of cloning. So should cloning exist? That's the big question. Because while it can save a species, should humans act as the ultimate decider of whether or not species should continue to exist? Remember, if you've heard of Charles Darwin with his idea of evolution, there's something called natural selection, which basically means that survival of the fittest. Whichever organism is best suited for that environment is going to survive, and the weak will die off. So if a species is dying off, should we as humans make that deciding factor and be like, yes, this organism should continue to survive, but then have difficulty? The other problem is if all of them become clones, the offspring is then going to become identical as well. So it causes some problems with that. So it would have to be done on a small scale, not a large mass scale. But again, the question remains, should we save the species? So what I need you to do now is actually pause this video that I am currently speaking, and then you're going to watch this video right here, the one of the sheep. It looks like a picture right now on my screen, but it actually is a video. So what you're going to want to do is pause my video again that I'm talking on, get out of present mode, and click that video. And I'd like you to watch the short video about Dolly the sheep and the amazing history that she has created. So hopefully you watched that video, you paused the video and were able to watch it and learned about Dolly the sheep. And she has some amazing history about her. And it's amazing that there's still even clones and remnants of Dolly still remaining. That just blows my mind because I actually didn't know that. And when I found this video, I was like, this is amazing. And remember how I even told you on Friday how they've recently cloned a ferret that was from the 80s. So it's over 30 years old. And they brought a ferret basically back to life, which is really, really interesting how they're able to do that through asexual reproduction. So next, I just want you to quickly answer this question. You can type in this mint green box here, but don't be in present, remember, otherwise you cannot type in there. But tell me what you think. Do you think organisms should be cloned? There's no right or wrong answer to this. This is just an opinion question, but I want to know if you think they should be cloned and why you think they should be or shouldn't be cloned. That's your opinion, but I really would like to hear this, so make sure you type your answer out in this box. All right, so some advantages of sexual reproduction. You're going to find that the advantages of asexual reproduction are often the disadvantages of sexual reproduction. So they're kind of opposite of each other. So there's a lot more advantages compared to disadvantages. And remember, there's less advantages of sexual reproduction and more disadvantages. So some advantages of asexual reproduction. 1, an organism can reproduce without a mate. That means they don't have to spend the energy of looking for a mate. They don't have to wonder or constantly be in search and not be able to reproduce if by chance there isn't a male or female in the environment. They just need themselves. They're able to do it, and their species is going to survive much easier because they don't have to spend that time nor energy to find a mate. Another one is they are able to produce a large number of organisms. So they're able to produce a large number. They're also able to reproduce at a much quicker rate. Both of these go hand in hand. As you can see, this one and this one kind of go hand in hand. Remember how I told you that it takes 9 months for a human baby to be born, and you only typically get one baby. Well, when we did that reproduction activity, you learned that a lot of asexual reproduction is done in a matter of days, and it produces a lot more than one offspring. So those are some advantages. It also doesn't have to reach sexual maturity typically, like sexual reproduction organisms do. They are just able to reproduce when they feel the need and when the time is right, and if their environment is at a space that they're happy with and are able to reproduce. So those are some advantages of sexual reproduction. Some disadvantages of sexual reproduction. The big one, lacks genetic diversity. Remember, genetic diversity is the differences of traits and characteristics between organisms that allow species to survive and adapt to that environment more so. But they're not able to do that because they're going to be genetic copies from the parents. So it's the same organism basically over and over and over again. There's no differences. There's no changes. So because of that, they're less likely to survive if by chance, say it was a plant that reproduces only asexually. If that drought comes along, it's not going to be able to survive as much if all of them need a large amount of water or something. So differences of traits, remember, or colors that you might see. Asexual organisms are not going to have that, and so they're not able to really adapt and survive to environmental changes that they might experience. Another disadvantage is a mutation. So mutation is going to be a genetic change, and often they're not for the positive. But the mutation, if it occurs, is going to be passed on to an offspring, and it can affect the offspring's ability to survive in a negative light. So if this mutation occurs and causes them to have a disadvantage to survive, well, this mutation is going to be continually passed on from generation to generation because they're identical copies. And there are some positive mutations that occur, but a lot of them are going to be negative, and they're not going to allow for species to have a good chance of survival. And remember, mutation is just going to be a genetic change that occurred in the gene pool that typically shouldn't have been there, shouldn't have happened, but it did for whatever reason, like the DNA got mixed up or something, and a different gene occurred. So, last thought for today. I want you to answer the question in this orange box of what is one advantage and one disadvantage of asexual reproduction. So just take a moment to answer that question. Remember, there's a lot more advantages compared to disadvantages, and they're typically opposite of sexual reproduction. So just take a moment to answer that question in the orange box. Remember, don't be in present mode. So one advantage you might say, by chance, if you're stuck, is that there are more offspring produced, requires less time, doesn't require a mate, don't have to reach sexual maturity. All of those would be advantages. One disadvantage could either be it lacks genetic diversity, which means they don't have the different traits and they're not going to be able to survive in their environment as well if there's changes, or there's going to be, my brain just went blank. Oh, that's it, mutations. Mutations are not going to occur. Mutations can occur which affect their ability to reproduce, and that gene is going to be passed down, and it doesn't allow them to survive as well in that environment. So any of those options would work for that question. All right, so just remember to submit these slides on Schoology, and we are going to be talking about the differences and similarities of sexual and asexual reproduction in the next couple of days, and then we're going to do some review. So good job, guys, and I will hopefully see you all in person on Thursday. Until then, see you guys.